taste on
Aren't
the
the
light.
veggies strong, is that about right? Or-
It's just about right for me.
That's
All
pretty
right.
good.
I think that's loud enough, Luke. Oh, how's everybody doing this morning? Me too. That's a great way to be. Tommy Owen, how would you like to lead us in prayer, sir?
Dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful for the opportunity of gathering as a family. Father, be with us today as we study from the Word and gain wisdom from it. Help us to be your light in this world. Help us to show your love. Help us to show some of the wisdom that you have. Father, be with the sick in the congregation, ones that are struggling with health. Lord, give them comfort. Give them what they need. Lord, forgive us our mercy. This is our prayer, Jesus.
Okay, we're going to be in the book of Numbers, but right quick, I need We do have handouts for the sermon later if you are interested. I know this is still rather new and folks don't think to pick them up, but I'm trying not to have to pass them out during service. So if you're interested, they're out there. Mark's got some in his hand right there. Let him know if you would like one. Okay, let's see where we left off. I show us in Numbers 12. Does that sound about right? Didn't we finish talking about the quail last week? Was I the only one here last week? Just trying to remember. Well, back up to the end of chapter 11 then, just in case. You know that the people are complaining again. They want meat. They're unhappy about just having the manna, and God says, okay, you asked for it, you'll get it. So I wanted to start reading verse 31 of chapter 11, just in case we didn't wrap this up the way I intended to. It says, now a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea and left them fluttering near the camp, about a day's journey on this side, about a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits above the surface of the ground. Now, just to give you and again, I've never been there. According to what I've been able to read, the quail in this region of the world were a migrating bird. And while they normally could fly very fast, they had very strong wings, when they migrated, and they'd migrate along the coastline closer to the Mediterranean Sea, they would let the wind currents carry them, and at the end of their migration, or at the end of that leg of their journey, they'd be pretty tired, as in barely able to fly at all. And so this would have been God taking a massive amount of migrating quail, blowing them inland from the sea, and by this time they're so tired they can barely fly. You know, it's 18 inches, so they're fluttering about 3 feet above the ground. And the people go nuts because there's more than they can count. Look at verse 32. It says, the people stayed up all that day, all night, and all the next day, and gathered the quail. He who gathered least gathered 10 homers. And they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. Now, if you can visualize, verse 33 is a visualizing verse. while the meat was still between their teeth. So you're just chewing it up, right? While the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people. And the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. He called the name of that place Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who had yielded to craving. So they griped and complained, tested the Lord. The Lord said, you asked for it, I'll give it to you. Gave it to them in abundance, but before they could even enjoy the meat, God's wrath is poured out. We don't know how many, but it sounds like it was a pretty substantial number. Now, chapter 12 is where I was planning on starting anyway, so let's just pick this up. You've got three dominant characters in the Israelite camp. For the whole of the story, whether you're talking about from the first appearance before Pharaoh, who else besides Moses was a key figure? Well, Pharaoh, but Aaron, right? So you've got Moses and Aaron, they're two of the top three places. And then after they're delivered through the sea, Miriam actually is enabled to prophesy, and she breaks out in song. And so you've got these three individuals. Now, they're all part of the same family. Who's the youngest of the three? Moses. Miriam was his older sister, who likely watched the basket being rescued or retrieved by the Pharaoh's daughter, and who volunteers to find the baby a wet nurse. Miriam has to be probably maybe 8-10 years older than Moses. Aaron is also older than Moses. So you've got three of the oldest members of the same family. The youngest of the bunch, the baby of the bunch, is the one who he's in the top slot, right? And I make that point because that seems to be what's really going on here. Now, as the chapter opens, it says Miriam and Aaron. Who's named first? Miriam is named first. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian or Cushite, I know some of the translations use, woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. So they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? You see how that went? There's the pretense. We're going to gripe about our new sister-in-law, whatever point Moses marries her. We're going to gripe about her, but that really wasn't the point of the matter at all. Because, yes, sir.
Bible where this is spoken of.
Where what's spoken of?
Him taking a wife.
No, we really don't know where this comes from because it's not Zipporah. It's kind of sprung on us. He could have taken a second wife. I see it as very unlikely. In addition to Zipporah, a lot of the scholars suggest or theorize that back when he has to circumcise his boys, Zipporah is upset with Moses. You know, the angel's going to kill him if they don't circumcise. And so Zipporah is very upset with Moses, and she's not mentioned again in Scripture. The thought being she very likely went back to her father's house. That's what's theorized. But this sudden statement, and we don't hear anything more about her after, this second wife after. I know of very few who suggest that they're talking about the same woman. I just don't see this being able to describe Zipporah at all. But most work from that theory. And again, I've seen some who suggest, well, Moses just took a second wife in addition to, and I don't see Moses doing that at all. It doesn't seem to be. As far as we can tell, it's not displeasing to God. Therefore, it should not have broken any laws. The only displeasure is voiced by Miriam and Aaron. Like, we don't like her, or she only wears blue jeans, or, something like that. Families never have inter-family conflict or strife. Right. So, but again, this is a pretext. This is not the issue. The issue is these three are in the top three spots as far as ranking in relation to God. Moses at the top, Aaron high priest, and Miriam clearly recognized as having prophetic ability. At any rate, she's done that. And so she seems to have been in a very respected role as well. But it seems that the elder brother and sister don't like the order. Okay, verse 2. Go back to that. They said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? Now, the answer to those questions are yes, he has, right? He has spoken through Miriam. She was unable to prophesy. He has spoken through Aaron at certain points. So there seems to be jealousy going on here. And the fact that Miriam is named regularly first in the list should give us some explanation for what's going to happen. Okay, spoken to us also. Oh, I like this. And it says, and the Lord heard it. Now, Bill, you're always saying, God hears everything, right? And he does. But there's a special emphasis being put on that. God's listening. He hears it. And he doesn't hear it, let's say, objectively. Like, we hear conversations going on out in the hall. No, he hears it specifically and with intent. He's listening, he knows, and he's going to respond. And his response is actually, in the original language, very dramatic. We'll look at that in just a moment. The Lord heard it. Verse 3. Now, verse 3 is a verse that critics regularly will use to say, see, Moses couldn't have written this book because Moses wouldn't have written this verse about himself. I'm not even going to address that. But if you run across somebody who doesn't believe Moses wrote these, or at least most of it, they're going to use this verse. That it's one of the first verses that shows up in their arguments. Verse 3, the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. The word can mean meek. It can also mean something akin to miserable, because by this point Moses had to deal with the people and they're complaining, and he'll deal with them again. He's had to deal with the entire burden of everything that's led up to this point, and now he's having to deal with Miriam and Aaron. So some suggest maybe the word should be translated miserable. I don't see it necessarily, but anyway. Oh, you said that next to Tony. I'm really impressed. I am.
You didn't have one for long.
True.
Okay. How do you follow that one? Verse 4, we're in wrath. We're not in humor here. Just making sure we know. It says, suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting. So the three came out. Now look at how verse 5 describes. If you're, again, picturing this is a very visually intended verse. The Lord came down in the pillar of cloud and did what? Stood in the door of the tabernacle. Now again, these are they call them anthropomorphisms. God is spirit. He doesn't have a body as such. These are trying to use that language to convey this is how upset God is. That's not what he did with the quail and punishing the people there. But this one is big. And so it says he came down in the pillar of cloud, stood in the door of the tabernacle, and called Aaron and Miriam. And they both went forward. Then he said, hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face. Again, that's a human attribute language. I speak with him face to face, even plainly, not in riddles or dark sayings. and he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Here it's God making this point very evident. If you've ever been puzzled, you remember when David is selected and anointed by Samuel, but Saul sets his sights on him and he wants to kill him. Have you ever wondered why David is so reluctant, so stubborn against causing Saul any harm? You remember? A couple of times Saul was delivered into his hands. David could have taken him out and ended his problems. And what does David always say rather than act? That's right. I'm not going to raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. This gives us some indication. When God anoints or chooses, sets someone apart, and puts his mark of approval on them, he considers it a very grave wrong to speak against them. And for Aaron and Miriam especially, because they've been working by inspiration of the Spirit, they've been prophesying, and yet they weren't careful not to speak against Moses. And so that helps explain, because people will look at the punishment that's about to be dealt out, at least to the sister, and go, boy, that's pretty severe. God considers that a big deal. Now, who is his ultimate anointed one? Jesus. If God considers it a big deal to stand against or to withstand or to mistreat his anointed ones throughout history, you know how he feels when the ultimate anointed one was mistreated. And if you've ever read like Josephus's account or some of the other historical accounts of the last days of Jerusalem before the Romans finally break through, it's horrible. But it is fitting because of how they treated God's anointed one. Yes, sir. Thanks, Mark.
Can we apply that today?
Okay. How? I think yes, but I want to know what you're thinking of.
Well, I think we need to be careful in criticizing our eldership. I'm not saying that they're above being criticized. I just think we need to be careful how we do it. I just think we need to be careful. Criticize.
I do agree with that.
If you have a criticism, you need to go to them face to face, not tell your other brothers and sisters and criticize. And I'm not suggesting that there's not elders that are worthy of criticism, but I think we need to worry about how we do it.
I would agree, and to a lesser extent,
Still be respectful.
can you criticize and still be respectful?
Yes.
Okay. Now,
There's a point where you criticize somebody and show dishonor to it.
yes.
You no longer consider him being anointed.
Okay.
You almost to the point that God made a mistake. And that's a position you don't want to be in.
Oh, I agree. I agree. I was trying to come up with an illustration of criticizing someone that we could call positive. Okay, well, Steve was next, and I'll get back to you.
Well, let's say we go to lunch today, and somebody at lunch says, I really wish the elders would think about blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
All right, I really wish the elders would think about such and such. different way of saying, why don't our elders blah, 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 blah.
Okay, good. That's what
That's a difference, where the first one you can say, have you gone to them and asked them about this? Have you gone more than once? Because I'm sure they have a lot of things going on. I should go to them and ask them to consider this. You're right. Now we've criticized, we've encouraged each other to do it in a better way, and not been disrespectful, in my opinion.
That's what I wanted. I wanted a positive example of it. Because I think that is a good contrast between the two.
A quick aside, back at verse 2, and the Lord heard it. I was laughing because I was thinking of two different contexts, and I'll tell you one. As a parent, there are times when our children are upset with us, and they're yapping. And we just kind of, okay. And then all of a sudden they'll say one thing that has gone from yapping to disrespectful. And I was thinking, and I heard that.
I like that. Okay, I heard of that.
Actually going to use you as an example.
Okay.
Just
The bad example or a good example?
yes.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Well, as has happened countless times, after an assembly or something, I'll come talk to you because I disagreed with something in a sermon. Now, you can call that being critical, but it's always out of love and respect.
Yes.
And that's, in a sense, criticism,
Okay.
but not intended with anything harmful or disrespectful. So, going back to your question, I think you can absolutely criticize people if you do it out of love and in a respectful fashion, as a couple other people have said. Now, having said that, I want to go to what Steve just said. And this has occurred to me many, many times through Scripture, talking about what God... There's a difference between listening and hearing.
Okay.
God hears everything. I got to believe there's times he doesn't really listen because he just knows it really doesn't matter. And he knows. Just a weird point.
Just a weird point.
Has nothing to do with anything.
Okay, let's get through the wrath part of it because I really need to, but I love it. That's what I was looking for, though, Tommy. I just wanted to make sure we offered an example of non-malicious. Hey, I like that, non-malicious criticism. So that's what I was looking for. I wasn't taking issue with your statement. I was trying to make sure we.
Put out there, and when you start disrespecting the authority that God has established, you're in a very dangerous position.
Yes. And what makes their position even more dangerous is they are already in an elevated position, an elevated status in the camp. It's not the same as John Smith over here in his tent. These are three of the recognized leaders. They've been inspired. They have prophesied. God has spoken to them or through them at some, and so they're held to a higher standard. What we need to know about this, even though it's not obvious at this point, is this is the first of the three, we'll just say punishments that God will deal out to these three leaders. Miriam is punished and dealt with here, and God gets her attention. Aaron will be dealt with a little further down the road, and then we know Moses is down at the end before they can go into the promised land. He has to be dealt with. So these three, even though they are elevated, they are used by God, they are sources of God's revelation, revealing His word, His truth. In spite of that, God is still going to hold them accountable, and they will pay the consequence. Okay, so Dennis, you had a comment.
they married, and then it was, he would tell them why I did it, and she said, oh yeah, that sounds good.
He might have, but they don't seem to be. They are approaching this from a malicious, a hostile intent. They are not approaching this humbly like some of the positive things were described. If you'll notice in verse 1, at least the New King James doesn't tell us for sure that Miriam and Aaron are even talking about Moses in his presence. It says they spoke against Moses, but it doesn't, and some other translations might correct me on this, but it doesn't necessarily tell us whether or not they were doing it to Moses' face, which would have at least been better, I think. Yep. That's right. And God's correcting that. Okay, let's finish this. Why then, verse 8, the end of the verse, Numbers 12. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? So the anger of the Lord was aroused against them, and he departed. When the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Now, again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against who in verse 9? It says them, right? Plural. Who bears the consequence? Miriam. That has puzzled scholars quite often over the years, and I think with good reason. But Miriam, we assume, is the instigator of this issue. She is named first back in verse 1. She's kind of the spark plug. But Aaron's right there with her. So it says, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned toward Miriam, and there she was, a leper. Now imagine, it's bad enough that it happens, but the way it happened, they're engulfed, or the cloud is right there in front of them, and as it departs, suddenly she is totally white. And we're going to assume it's that scabby, definitely unhealthy, especially by the way Aaron describes it in a minute. There she was, a leper. Verse 11, Aaron says to Moses, my Lord, please do not lay this sin on us, in which we have done foolishly. It was more than foolishly, but in which we have done foolishly and in which we have sinned. Please do not let her be as one dead, whose flesh is half consumed when he comes out of his mother's womb. Now that's, again, a graphic description. Yes, sir? Yes, the plural is maintained.
He was punished so much. He didn't get leprosy.
Not at this point. Either she's the instigator, or God chooses to withhold Aaron's punishment until the next account where he does deal with Aaron. That may also be what's going on. But this definitely was directly intended to get Miriam's attention. And I don't think she makes that mistake again. Verse 13. It did get Aaron's attention. Yes. That's true. Yes. Now, that part, no question. There had to have been that. Did I see another hand? I'm trying not to miss anybody, but okay. And Moses, to his credit, he is regularly interceding. And they've just come out against him, tried to tear him down. And it says, Moses cries out to the Lord, saying, please heal her, O God, I pray. And the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, would she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days, and afterward she may be received again. So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. Afterward, the people moved from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. Okay, what does it not say? in the verses I just read? Does not expressly say she's healed. We assume because anyone who was had leprosy was to go through all of the priestly rituals, and after they were pronounced clean, then they would spend the 7 days, 7 further days isolated before they were restored. The text does not say, that I can see, that she's healed. There is another provision in the law, and I'm not going to go back to it. Somebody said, you're not going back to Leviticus again? I said, no, I won't. But there was another provision in the law that said when a person was fully covered in leprosy, that was also another point in the cleansing process, or the being pronounced clean. So, just saying, there's this question mark right here, and we don't know how to picture Miriam in our minds after this, because the text doesn't expressly say. The last description of her is, she became white as snow. Maybe she's remained that way. Now, in the movie with Charlton Heston, I don't think she did. I don't remember that. Okay. That's right. Charlton Heston didn't get out into this part. Sir?
I have one question about
Okay.
that. Moses prayed to God, and God told him what he would do. 7 days, she would come back into camp.
Right.
But God said that.
Yes.
Don't you think he was the one that healed her? And she didn't have to go through what they had to go through in the past.
Well, if he'll, yes, I'm not saying that he's the source of healing one way or the other. Yes. It is curious that he doesn't say, I'm healing her. It doesn't say she's restored. It says God gives permission after 7 days for her to come back in the camp. Now, we can assume, because Moses asks for it, that God heals her. That's about the best we can come up with. I just wanted you to notice the text doesn't expressly say that.
As God said, bring her back in, and she's going to be healed.
That's what we can assume, okay?
I think probably a little bit better than the assumption. That's a good inference, because she would be banned due to the strict adherence to the law. She can't be in the camp if she's still leprous.
I got to go find that passage in Leviticus, but I'm not going to do it this morning. I just wanted to, I was just throwing that out there as another possibility. But you're right, we assume, however, if God says she can come back in the camp, whether she's got leprosy on her or not, it is his call. Yeah. I was just making sure we're reading carefully. It doesn't exactly say that. Yes, sir?
One thing about Aaron and his apparent lack of immediate physical consequences is it may have just been because of his role and how it would have affected the rest of the Israelites.
That's true.
Him out for a week, there are certain things that would not be done for a week.
Yeah.
And would that not have been the discrimination?
Definitely could have been as well. Okay. We've got 5 minutes to start talking about the spies. I thought we'd be here a lot sooner than that. I apologize. I want you to, somebody read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 13, just for a moment. Just read it out loud, good and loud. Like Steve.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send out for yourself men so that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their fathers' tribes, every one a leader among them.
Okay. Now listen to this from Deuteronomy. Remember, Deuteronomy is written some 40 years after the events where we are in Numbers. Roughly. Well, no, just about exactly, actually. Deuteronomy chapter 1. And Moses, basically Moses is saying, I'm telling you the story. I'm reminding you everything that's happened till now, and he's especially telling it to the new generation because the old generation has died out. He says, verse 20, I said to you, you have come to the mountain of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. Look, the Lord your God has set the land before you. So they're right there ready on the precipice of entering the land at this point as he's telling the story. He says, go up and possess it as the Lord God of your fathers has spoken to you. Do not fear or be discouraged. Verse 22, every one of you came near to me and said, let us send men before us. Let them search out the land for us and bring back word to us of the way by which we should go up and of the cities into which we shall come. The plan pleased me well. So I took 12 of your men, one man from each tribe, and they departed. Okay. What's the problem with those two stories? Yes. And so there are some different theories as to how the two reconcile. I know they didn't hear you, Barbara. She said, I got to remember that. She said that in one account, the Lord brings it up. He's the motivator and the instigator of it. And in the Deuteronomy account, it's the people who bring it up. The most likely reconciliation between the two is the people brought it up, and God said, you know what? We'll go ahead and listen to their voice. Now, I use that because we know he does it later in his interaction with Israel when the people come to Samuel and demand a king, and God said, listen to the voice of the people. It was the people who wanted the king, and God allowed it. He accepted it. So, that seems to be the most likely reconciliation of the two accounts. The people came up with the idea, whereas if that's the ones who originally came up with the idea, then the assumption would be that when we reach this point in Numbers, God would have preferred they march across the Jordan and get to work. Instead of, well, let's take time, let's send the spies. God knew what was going to happen. So, based on that analogy, that reconciliation of the two accounts, it would seem that had the people just shut up, which they weren't very good at, I'm so glad we never do anything like that today. If they just hushed up, they could have marched right into the city. Jericho would have been their next stop. Well, no, they would have had to do the re-sanctification, reaffirming the covenant, and then they would have marched on in and got right into Jericho. And we would have not, we wouldn't have had to have another 20 chapters of Numbers and most of the book of Deuteronomy because we would have missed all of that. That's not the case. So, just because the two approach it from different sides doesn't mean it's not the same event, not the same record. I just wanted you to notice that. I didn't want you to get to Deuteronomy someday with your next preacher because you know how long it'll take me to get to Deuteronomy. That was supposed to be humorous. Okay, I guess it wasn't. Back to Numbers 13. Let's at least get started. He says, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. Now, we've got all the names. We've got 12 leaders chosen from the 12 tribes. The ones I want you to make sure you see. Verse 6, from the tribe of Judah, who? Caleb. He's a pretty important dude. Now, what about verse 8? What does your translation say? Somebody, anybody. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, the son of Nun, right? It could also be worded Oshea. Now, jump ahead to verse 16. These are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, and Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, who? Joshua. So all this time, we've known this guy by the name Joshua, even though apparently it doesn't happen until this point. course, Moses is writing the entire record. I see no problem, but it's kind of like Luke writing the book of Acts, and he starts out calling him Saul, and then down through the letter, all of a sudden the name changes to Paul. Kind of interesting. Moses doesn't. This is the only time we learn Joshua's original name. One means, I'm trying to remember what Hosea means. I had it in a note. Salvation. Joshua means the Lord saves, and it's a form of the same word from which we get Jesus. One of the reasons that there's a passage in the Hebrews where it gets a little confusing when he's talking about Joshua or Jesus, and because the names are so, they come from the same origin. So we've got the 12 men. I didn't read all the rest of the names. You can read them. We find out where Joshua's name comes from. Moses renames him, and the name sticks, obviously, because everywhere else he's known as Joshua. Verse 17, let's go ahead and read about their reconnaissance anyway. It says, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, said to them, go up this way into the south, go up to the mountains, see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there are not, or not. Be of good courage. Bring some of the fruit of the land. Wait a minute. Bring some of the fruit of the land. And then it says, now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. Now I'm going to go ahead and it looks like they do what Moses tells them to do. It says they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamath. They went up through the south and came to Hebron. Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then there came to the valley of Eshcol, and there cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes. They carried it between two of them on a pole. How big a cluster of grapes must that have been? That's a massive rascal. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs. The place was called the Valley of Eshcol, which means cluster, because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down there. They returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now, let's stop there. To this point, have the spies been faithful? At least from their actions, right? The difference comes in the verses that follow, and we don't have time to get into that. I don't want to start it and have to break off of it. But to this point, all 12 men see the same thing. All 12 men are following the instructions they were given by Moses, and they have gone, they have studied the land, they've gathered the fruit, and now they're returning just like they were told. And then everything, what do they say? Then the wheels fall off? That's pretty well it. But I want to pick that up, Lord willing.